Some of the techniques that we've discussed in assessing the impact of social media on education is first and foremost data and text mining technologies that can determine just strictly quantitative data as far as use and penetration of such technologies. Second is a series of surveys that can determine acceptance and attitudes towards these technologies and the relationship between these technologies and the subjects that are covering. And these would be, of course, both quantitative and qualitative data. Outcomes assessments, like normal, to determine the skills that were learned. Changes in standard metrics such as pass and fail rates and retention rates from before and after the implementation of these technologies, and comparing participation and outcomes with course and programs, comparing participation and outcomes with courses and programs that are not using social media as a part of their normal course
Control and variable.
There you go.
Great methodology.
And then finally, one advantage is that not all of these types of evaluation methods need to be enacted immediately, because social media, because of the format that it's in, could create a large archive of evidence that could be then assessed sometime in the future as different needs arrive.
We actually doubled up on some of the things that they talked about. One thing that you can do is you can count the number of engagements. That doesn't give you a picture of the quality of those engagements, but you can use tools like Hootsuite or Social Mention. Those are a couple that you can use to actually monitor all your social media outlets to see the number of engagements. So like, for example, if I'm using Twitter for my class to start a discussion before we meet face-to-face, I can count the number of engagements that the students had and how many times they tweeted. And then what I could do is, after I've counted the number of engagements, I could then, at the end of that content, that section of content, I could then assess them to find out which students did the best job of regurgitating the information, if you will, for me. And then I could compare the grades that they made and see who was more engaged up front, and did they get a better grade because they were engaged. I mean, that sounds like a really good research project to me, actually. It does sound really cool, doesn't it? That'd be a lot of work, but it would be something that I guarantee would get published somewhere. If you're going to assess, and that's the question, evaluate. If you're going to evaluate, you've either got to evaluate in terms of numbers, or you have to evaluate their feelings afterwards. You have to find some. I mean, there's a qualitative aspect and there's a quantitative aspect to this, to evaluate exactly what the outcomes were. But a lot of it depends on your goal. For example, if my goal is for them to get better grades in my class, then I could perhaps try to get them engaged using Facebook or Twitter up front, and then maybe that got me better grades on the end. But for example, if my goal is to use Facebook to get more students to apply to my school, and that would be pretty easy to evaluate, because then you could say who actually went through my Facebook page to apply and which ones actually ended up applying, and did social media increase my number of applications, or those who ended up coming to school here. I mean, so I guess it depends on your goal as to which tool you're going to use and how you're going to evaluate it. But there's no doubt, if you're going to evaluate it, there's got to be some sort of instrument on the end, like a rubric of some kind, where you're actually going to evaluate the outcomes. I mean, that's the only way that I know that you could actually evaluate something, is to do that. And the last thing that I'll mention is, because I forgot to mention this in the last section, was another idea that somebody on our campus had on how to use social media. We have a faculty member who's going to be doing, their students are going to be doing service learning projects as part of their grade for that class. And she's going to be using Twitter when they go to do their service learning project, to tweet while they're doing their service learning project. And then they tweet with a certain hashtag, and then you can search for the hashtag later, and then pull it up on one page and see all the ideas and thoughts that people had while they were doing their service. And then you use that running conversation about that event to then either go write a paper about it or have a discussion in class about it, or to go a little bit deeper. So that's one way social media can be really light on the front end and then really, really serious and heavy on the back end when you evaluate how everybody felt about that engagement.